More and more of our country's information ecosystem has been transformed into a machine that takes what Donald Trump says and pushes it out as the truth. And that means that Donald Trump can get away with blatant lies like this one.
Make up some lies, like she said about the border bill that Trump stopped. Let me tell you, number one, I didn't stop it.
That was Donald Trump today in Michigan, telling a rally that he did not stop the bipartisan immigration bill that was drafted earlier this year. Now, that may sound like a small detail, but because polls show immigration is a top issue for voters this year, and because Trump is trying to pin the current status of our country's immigration system on Vice President Harris, whether or not Trump killed something that would have addressed immigration in a big way is a key detail here. And the truth is, he did. He did kill it. But don't just take my word for it.
Everybody who comes on this floor and says our border's broken, we should do something about it, you're absolutely right. And unfortunately, we didn't get there. President Trump opposed a Senate bill. We couldn't find a better way forward.
President Trump said don't fix anything during the presidential election. It's the single biggest issue during the election. Don't resolve this.
Just a couple of months ago, Republican senators were loud and proud about the fact that it was Donald Trump who killed that bipartisan immigration bill. And you know who else was loud and proud about it? Donald Trump.
There is zero chance I will support this horrible open borders betrayal of America. It's not going to happen. I noticed that, and I'll fight it all the way. I noticed a lot of the senators are trying to say respectfully they're blaming it on me. I said, that's okay. Please blame it on me. Please.
Blame it on me, please. But of course, now that that particular detail is complicating Trump's presidential campaign, he is rewriting history in front of our eyes. And to a huge swath of the country, he will probably get away with it. Meanwhile, back on Earth One, in reality, today Vice President Harris made a trip to Douglas, Arizona, to the U.S.-Mexico border, where she did her best to tell the truth about Donald Trump.
It was the strongest border security bill we have seen in decades. It was endorsed by the Border Patrol Union. And it should be in effect today, producing results in real time right now for our country. But Donald Trump tanked it. He picked up the phone and called some friends in Congress and said, stop the bill. Because, you see, he prefers to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem.
Which version of this story will more of the American public believe? Harris's version or Trump's? It's hard to know. Right now, the polls aren't just unbelievably close. They are also confusingly contradictory. Just as an example, let's look at the state Vice President Harris is in right now, Arizona. New polling from Bloomberg today shows Harris up in Arizona by 3 points, but new polling from USA Today shows Trump up in Arizona by 6 points. So where are we really? Joining me now are two people who know a thing or two about running presidential campaigns. Faz Shakir, former campaign manager for Senator Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign, and Roger Lau, former campaign manager for Senator Elizabeth Warren's 2020 presidential one, and currently deputy executive director of the DNC. Gentlemen, thank you so much for spending a little of your Friday evening with me. Faz, let me just start with you. In terms of the polling, which would get anybody seasick, right? It's just back and forth, the dial moving this way and that. I mean, how do you look at, for example, Arizona? When you think about Arizona, what do you think?
Well, so you look at that border trip today, and it wouldn't obviously be my first choice as a progressive, but the campaign would rightly respond that, well, we're not thinking about you, Faz. You're going to vote for Kamala Harris anyways. So we need to think about the people who aren't going to vote for her, who are undecided, who are on the fence. And I'm sure that they've got indications that the immigration issue is one that they need to continue to resolve with some of those people. We're getting into the phase, Alex, where data science is going to play a huge role for each of these campaigns, and particularly for Harris's, because you're going to have early votes coming coming in. And good campaigns will track those early votes, know whether their people are voting, and they're going to know, more importantly, who's not voting. And of those people, letting them know what are the messages that are going to move you, how do we need to persuade you down the home stretch. It's going to play a giant role, data will, in these next few weeks.
Roger, the argument over, and Kamala Harris is telling the truth. Donald Trump killed the Senate immigration bill. That happened. He is trying to rewrite history. And I'm not suggesting that there's any validity to the argument he's making, but it's an interesting case study in how much the truth matters, you know, a month before the election, and the degree to which this is going to move people on an issue, as Faz points out, that appears to be of top concern among American voters, and especially those undecideds.
Yeah, there's no question that the truth matters. And, you know, I think, as you pointed out, you know, Americans, you know, are talking about immigration. They want to see action on the immigration issue. And that's exactly what the vice president did today. She went down to Douglas, Arizona to see the issue herself, be at the border, listen to the experts, you know, talk to stakeholders, and just wanted to make sure that she laid out this idea that we need to take action that Donald Trump and Republicans killed, by making sure that we have a safe, fair, humane way of making sure that we have a border system, making sure that we enforce our laws, but also making sure that the American dream is still alive, right? That you know, families like mine, both of my parents were immigrants that came to America for freedom, opportunity, economic opportunity, but also to live in a democracy. And we need to give that opportunity a chance as well. And she's talking about that with Dreamers. She's talking that with for those who've been living in this country, playing by the rules and paying their taxes.
You know, Faz, I get that it is a careful line she is trying to tread and a big tent she's trying to build. But I do wonder, you know, is she going to get credit for, I think, what she's trying to do, two things in her remarks today. Is she going to get credit with the people she needs to get credit from, which is this sort of undecided middle that may be open to Trump's arrows that he's pointed, that may be susceptible to Trump's message that she hasn't done enough on the border because she is the sitting vice president and may not actually believe what she's saying, which is that Donald Trump killed the bipartisan bill?
Well, and I also think, in addition to what you said, Alex, there's a sense of reaffirming her values as a prosecutor. But
yeah.
You remember that they spent a lot of time in the convention trying to emphasize that portrait of who Kamala Harris is, particularly for people who don't know much about her or being introduced to her for the first time. What does a prosecutor do? A prosecutor enforces the law. And so, however you might feel about immigration, she's telling you, we got to enforce the law. We got to have secure borders. And I think that portrait happens to be one, I think, that is strong. It works to her advantage. She probably spent more time in the speech thinking and talking about her role as an enforcer, as a California Attorney General, as a prosecutor, and then she even did, you know, as vice president. So I think it was another way to introduce herself to people who haven't been paying attention.
Roger, you know, can you run, if you're Trump, we talked earlier in the segment, in the opening script, about the role Elon Musk is playing here. He's obviously giving Trump a major assist in terms of diluting the truth or steering it directly into the territory of misinformation. He's also playing a role in terms of the nuts and bolts of the campaign itself. What do you think of the fact that they've effectively outsourced door knocking to a super PAC run by the guy from Tesla?
Well, outsourcing is consistent with Donald Trump's record. I mean, look, you know, this is a close election. We're going to in all 7 states and you know, in the Nebraska congressional district. We know it's all within the margin of error, and the campaign was built by the campaign, by the Harris campaign and the DNC to meet that moment. And you know, that's exactly the competitive edge that we feel like we've had all along, building on the ground over the course of more than a year. And that's why the DNC is proud that over the course of the year, we've invested in battleground states, coordinated campaigns. We have over 300 offices and 2,000 organizers on the ground who've been there, you know, talking to neighbors, doing door to door, making phone calls. And that's how we win this election, you know, voter by voter, conversation by conversation. But I'm also incredibly proud that the DNC today announced that we've not only invested in battleground states, but also in non-battleground states as well. It turns out there are tough elections up and down the ballot for Senate, for Congress, for State House, and all those things matter too, because obviously the top priority for all of us, you know, no secret, making sure that Kamala Harris gets elected president, but we want to make sure that we deliver a governing majority for her as well, and that's true for, again, in the Senate, Congress, but also State Houses, because that's going to be where we make the change. That's going to be where we make the difference. And the other part of it is we want to make sure we win the popular vote and win it big.
Yeah, I mean, Roger makes a really great contrast with not only is the Harris campaign very invested in that grassroots organization, the DNC is investing in the down ballot races. They're looking forward to what it would be like if Kamala Harris actually won the White House and had to govern. What do you think, Faz, of getting, 300, 400 people who answer Elon Musk's classified ad doing your door knocking? I mean, I don't know about the stuff you do. It just seems risky.
Well, I got to say a word about Elon Musk here for a minute. So remember, Citizens United, when they made that decision, the Supreme Court, terrible decision, they said one of the reasons they allowed Citizens United unfiltered money, to go into these campaigns was to say there's no quid pro quo here. These are outside groups, so they can take as much money as they want, spend as much money as they want. There's quid pro quo going on, Alex. This is Elon Musk, who was told, right? We learned from Donald Trump, if he were to win, he's going to outsource to Elon Musk government efficiency, running the government. What's he going to do? What's Elon Musk going to do with the government? He's going to cut. He's going to. I'm sure it's not going to be good stuff. And so here you got the person who's running a super PAC being promised a job. And by the way, Elon Musk started this electric vehicle company we might have all heard of. Here's the guy, Donald Trump, campaigning to abolish EVs. So there's no principles and values going on here. It's a truly quid pro quo to help one billionaire with another billionaire. I would say that, these do matter. I mean, it helps that when there's canvases on the ground. I do think that when you have canvassers that work, they're motivated, they're inspired not by money, but by passion, by cause. And that's where I feel like we are on a better track than Elon Musk trying to pay people off.
Maybe Elon Musk will move the federal government to Texas. I mean, that's the thing he likes to do. Just saying. Faz Shakir, Roger Lau, thank you guys again for your time and wisdom.
As of right now, there is just one debate left on the calendar before Election Day. On Tuesday night, vice presidential candidates J.D. Vance and Tim Walz will face off in what may be the last chance for Americans to directly contrast their campaigns' messages. Now, since joining their respective tickets, Vance and Walz have taken very different approaches to campaigning. While Tim Walz has focused on hitting the trail, spending way less time with the press and doing interviews, it seems like J.D. Vance is always talking to the media, often with pretty disastrous results. In the polling average, Vance's net favorability rating is more than 11 points underwater. Meanwhile, Walz is holding steady at 3.8 points net favorable. It's not all that surprising when you consider the way that J.D. Vance has taken on this role, where he basically acts like a flamethrower of messaging. He will say the most negative, wildly unpopular thing, no matter how much it makes people dislike him. It goes all the way back to his now infamous line, back when he was just before he joined the ticket, about childless cat ladies.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies. I don't like this. I don't like to admit this. I don't like that this is a fact of life. But if you are a psycho and you want to make headlines, you realize that our schools are soft targets. You have a lot of people saying, my pets are being abducted, or geese at the city pond are being abducted and slaughtered right in front of us.
Today, we got new reporting about more instances of Vance putting his foot in his mouth, although these might anger his running mate even more than his potential voters. The Washington Post obtained messages Vance sent to an acquaintance harshly criticizing then-President Trump in February of 2020. Vance wrote in part, quote, "Trump has just so thoroughly failed to deliver on his economic populism." And another, a few months later, Vance predicted, "I think Trump will probably lose." I certainly hope we get to hear Vance try to wriggle his way out of this one at the debate just a few short days from now. Michelle Goldberg is an opinion columnist for the New York Times. Margaret Tlaib is the director of Syracuse University's Institute for Democracy, Journalism, and Citizenship, where she's been running focus groups, most recently with young male voters. She's also a senior contributor at Axios, and they join me now. Michelle, I have come to view, I think some of what J.D. Vance is doing is not intentional, right? Like, a lot of the stuff that people don't like about him were things he was saying in right-wing outlets when he's trying to win a very right-wing primary for Ohio Senate. But since he's become the nominee, he hasn't changed. And I think of it basically a kamikaze mission, which is, people are not going to like me and I don't care. I'll be like low on favorability, but I'm going to deliver this kind of poison into the discourse every day. I don't know if it's effective or not, but how do you read it?
Well, I would say, I think that is certainly going to be his approach in the debate, right? Because people don't like him, so he can be mean, he can be vicious. And what he has to do is right now, Tim Walz is one of the most popular politicians in the country, right? Even after all sorts of smears about his military service, attacks on his family and the like. And so what J.D. Vance has to do is just drag Tim Walz down into the mud with him. And I think that he will probably be pretty vicious and pretty skillful in trying to do that. What I hope Tim Walz does, you mentioned his Washington Post story. I think this is such a bombshell. And I really think that the political media and the political world is underreacting to this, because we all knew that J.D. Vance, said all these things about Donald Trump, compared him to Hitler, compared him to heroin. And his story for why he's now on the ticket is that Donald Trump's presidency changed his mind. Right. Donald Trump's presidency proved him wrong. So here he is saying that Donald Trump failed in the thing that Donald Trump's supporters kind of point to as the central reason why he should be returned to office. This is just, I think this undoes the entire conversion narrative that J.D. Vance has tried to spin. And it's so incumbent on Tim Walz to make that clear to people. And not just to make that clear to people, but just as Kamala Harris kind of needled Donald Trump when she was on stage with him, I think that Tim Walz can do this remotely, because I don't think Donald Trump knew about these quotes. And he's not going to be happy to find out that this was J.D. Vance's verdict on him.
Yeah, the running mate secretly declared your presidency a failure is a pretty big story. Margaret, you've been doing these focus groups, particularly with young men, and J.D. Vance, I guess, counts as a young man in politics. Tim Walz a little less so. But I do think they're both sort of chosen, and whether this is borne out by the data or not, to sort of appeal to certain conceptions of masculinity, certain kinds of male voters. I wonder what you think undecided voters are going to be looking for or taking away from these two guys when they face off next week.
Chris, the most recent group of young men voters who we were talking to, and these are our focus groups with Syracuse Engages and NBC News, were sort of split among men who lean toward Trump and men who lead toward Kamala Harris. And the trend that we saw very clearly was that those voters who were still skeptical but lean toward Trump are doing so either because they really like Trump or because they don't like Harris. But the other group, the voters who were leaning towards Harris, were leaning towards Harris because they don't like Trump. It's not Harris in particular that they're enamored with. In many cases, they see her as the lesser of two evils. I think with this debate coming up, normally vice presidential debates are not hugely consequential because people are not voting for the number two person on the ticket. But the gender gap between Trump and Harris is so significant. And there's a really different dynamic with the vice presidential candidates, with the lower half of the ticket, where you see both, you see not just with women, but with men polling that shows that Tim Walz is actually the more popular candidate. So it's possible that he has the ability to help solidify some of those voters who were men and leaning towards Harris, but not completely confident. On the other hand, Vance really does have an opportunity to take Tim Walz down a peg or two. And so the dynamic I'm going to be looking for is sort of the flip of what both men are known for. Are we going to see more heart and relatability from J.D. Vance in this debate? Are we going to see more substance from Tim Walz?
Well, or more cutthroatness. I think that's the interesting thing, is like how much he goes on the attack. And I do think, Michelle, there's one more case that hasn't been made here. Donald Trump is the oldest guy to ever run for president since Biden dropped out. His brains are leaking out of his ears, metaphorically speaking, not literally. He's losing his grasp. J.D. Vance has a very good chance of running the country. As an actuarial matter, he's not just some emissary messaging. The guy could have the nuclear codes, and I think that's a worthwhile thing to press. Is this guy ready for that is a genuine question that I don't think people have been talking about enough.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. The possibility that J.D. Vance could be president in 2026 or 2027 is something that we have kind of collectively failed to both reckon with and I think make clear to people that this is a very real possibility. And it's strange because I think the media did a good job of both dissecting the kind of Joe Biden's the way that Joe Biden had faded. And I think it was pretty clear that a vote for Joe Biden was at least potentially a vote for a President Kamala Harris. But people just haven't thought through what it would mean to have this vicious and dishonest and deeply misogynist and also deeply inexperienced figure as the President of the United States.
Guy's been a senator for 2 years. All his jobs before that were given to him by Peter Thiel. With the nuclear codes, Michelle Goldberg, Margaret Talleb. Thank you both.
Talk to me about the strategy that we've been reading about that you're engaging in terms of taking this particular issue head on. Donald Trump has portrayed this as a Democratic failure, as a Biden failure, as a Harris failure. You're approaching the discussion about border security in Texas and on the southern border differently.
Yeah, well, I've long called on an attention and a response to the crisis here, but to also focus it on our border communities and on the need for us to act both at the executive level, but also at the congressional level, because it's personal for me, Ali. My grandfather was a customs officer in Brownsville. He's responsible for the Gateway Bridge. Everybody in Texas and Brownsville knows which bridge that is. And that's where my mom and my aunt were born and raised and where I spent a lot of my childhood. And so I know that our border communities are real places and they bear the brunt, quite honestly, of our inaction. And so I'm glad to see more executive action being proposed, but this has to be done congressionally as well. And that's where the bipartisan border bill in the Senate that Ted Cruz helped take down becomes a really important point of discussion, because there was $20 billion, Ali, for border security in that bill, for more immigration judges, for more administrative personnel, but also for more Border Patrol agents and for technology to catch fentanyl coming across the border. And that's what we need to do.
So the issue here is that was a bill that a lot of Republicans didn't like, a lot of Democrats didn't like, but that's the nature of this kind of difficult work in Congress. Donald Trump runs away from the fact that he was responsible for killing that bill because there are a lot of Republicans who would rather run on the problem of border issues than solutions to border issues.
That's right. Well, listen, I just was in South Texas visiting some of my friends there, and I'll tell you, it's kind of a joke that Ted Cruz comes down to South Texas and puts on his outdoor clothes and tries to look tough, and then goes back to Washington and does nothing at all to help. I mean, it's becoming just a joke in that. Don't come down and then say we need to do these things and then go and stop us from actually doing those things in your job as a senator. We have folks to point out problems. We have Border Patrol agents who are working as hard as they can. In fact, one of the concerns that I've had for them is that we are increasingly seeing some mental health issues within the Border Patrol because they're being asked to work overtime and sometimes away from home, and they're experiencing all of the stress that comes along with that as a workforce. That's why this bill, which would have hired more Border Patrol agents, was so important. And so, listen, it's not enough to talk about an issue.
Yeah.
People expect you to solve it. And when you're from these communities, like my family is, the inaction becomes something that's just unacceptable.
Where do you, to what do you attribute the fact that this inaction has been for so long? The fact is this continues to be a very, very big issue for Americans, regardless of where you stand on it. Most people seem to agree. We're a country. We have a border, and we should be able to maintain what goes on at that border. Who comes in, what comes in, what stays out, and who stays out.
Yeah. Well, we haven't had the political courage or the political leadership in place to do it in the Congress. And let's go back to 2013 when Barack Obama and the Gang of Eight was coming together and put together a comprehensive reform to our immigration system with billions of dollars in that bill as well for border security, important changes. Ted Cruz was in the Senate at that time, and he helped take down that bill back then, just like he helped take down this bill earlier this year. You mentioned that Republicans and Democrats had issues with the bill that that was being discussed in the Senate. Not really, actually. This was largely just the enforcement side of our border security, but none of the reforms to our legal immigration system that we know we also have to do. And so, honestly, to fix this, we have to get folks in there who actually want to solve it, as you said, instead of just having the problem to run on. And I do think, in the back of their minds, and I know this is true for Ted Cruz, he's thinking, well, if we had passed this bill, if we had actually put these billions of dollars into border security, what would I have talked about in the election? Because that's my main issue that I'm trying to run on. And I can't, and that has to be so outrageous to every Texan that you would put yourself and your reelection over what's best for our state.
I don't know. I used to think people used to get things done and then run on the idea that they were involved in the solution.
Right.
But apparently that's...
You could say, look what I did.
Look what I did. The world's just an upside-down place. Congressman Colin Allred, thanks for being with us tonight. Colin Allred is a Democratic Senate nominee in Texas.
A new ad by George Conway's Anti-Psychopath PAC features Natasha Stoynoff, the People magazine reporter who accused Donald Trump of sexually assaulting her when she visited his Mar-a-Lago resort in 2005 to interview him and his new wife, Melania.
My name is Natasha Stoynoff. In 2005, I went to interview Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. At one point, Melania went upstairs to change her clothes for the next photo shoot. And Trump said to me, I want to show you this beautiful painting, this beautiful room. He leads me to this room, pushes me against the wall, and starts kissing me forcefully. I tried to push him. He kept coming back at me. I was in shock and smothered, and he had his hands here against my shoulders. I felt sick inside. I felt horrified. And thank goodness the butler charges into the room.
In response to a request for comment, the Trump campaign accused George Conway of Trump derangement syndrome and called the ad another sad, desperate attempt by Kamala's cronies to gaslight the American people. E. Jean Carroll and more than 24 women would beg to differ. Trump has repeatedly denied all accusations of sexual assault and has not faced criminal charges over any of the allegations other than E. Jean Carroll's civil case. Joining me now is Natasha Stoynoff and George Conway, president and executive director of the Anti-Psychopath PAC and co-host of the George Conway Explains It All podcast. Thank you both for being here. I do want to go to you first, Natasha, because you are a journalist. Because you're a journalist, you're part of what you do professionally is observe. And so as you observed Donald Trump then and you observed him now, would you describe him as a predator? Would you describe him as somebody who you feared might actually sexually assault you, as he did E. Jean Carroll? Tell me in that moment what you feared the end game was had that butler not intervened.
I never thought of him as a predator at that time. And that's why I was fine to be in a room alone with him. But it occurred to me after the incident that that was the first time I was ever in the room alone with him. I'd interviewed him several times, but had always been surrounded by publicists, managers, and there was no reason for me to really think anything untoward would happen being in the room alone with him.
But once it did, and then when you later heard, you go back many years later, and you heard him in that Access Hollywood video, which was recorded, I think, the same year that what happened to you happened, where he said, when I see a beautiful woman, I just kiss. I don't even wait. And then he said, you can do anything when you're famous. You can grab them by the... which is what he did to E. Jean Carroll. When you heard that tape, thinking about what happened to you, what did you think?
It's weird. I felt a combination of relief, which may sound odd, but that's because I had been blaming myself for what had happened. So when I saw that, I thought, oh, he just does this with everybody. And I felt horrified because, number one, of what he was saying he did, and number two, I worried that had I spoken up earlier, perhaps I could have prevented some assaults.
Let me go to you, George. You created something called the Anti-Psychopath PAC. I am fascinated by, well, I mean, it's obvious why you named it that, but why did you feel to go that strong with it, to go that strong with the name, and also to do these ads? And who are they targeting?
He is a psychopath, and he's a narcissistic sociopath or psychopath, a malignant narcissist. He really is. He represents sort of the worst of the human spirit, or dispirit, if you will. He is mentally ill. He suffers from narcissistic personality disorder and suffers from antisocial personality disorder. He checks all the boxes. And among those boxes are really some very, very negative characteristics that you can find in a small number of human beings, which is a complete lack of empathy, a complete inability to follow rules and laws and to respect the big boundaries and dignity of other human beings, a complete lack of remorse, pathological lying, and an impulsiveness. And there's so many of these characteristics that illustrate themselves in his behavior toward women. It explains his misogyny, it explains a lot of other things, his criminality, but it explains what he did with E. Jean Carroll and what he said to Billy Bush that time. He's like, this is how he actually thinks. He believes this. And he, the notion that he did this with his wife, to Natasha, with his wife in the same building, the notion that he did what he did to E. Jean Carroll, as a jury found, in a department store in Midtown Manhattan. He's a very, very sick and dangerous man. And that's part of the reason why we're doing this, is to really bring that home to people by showing them the victims.
And let me add another victim, Jessica Leeds, because you also did an ad with her. Let's play that.
1979, I had gotten on an airplane. The stewardess said to me, "Would you like to come up to first class?" In the window seat was a gentleman, said that his name was Donald Trump. The airplane took off, and all of a sudden, Donald Trump started groping me. He was trying to kiss me, and I'm trying to push him away. He was basically overpowering me. 2 years later, at this fundraiser, up comes Trump and his wife, and he looked at me, and he said, "I remember you. You're that from the airplane."
Natasha, there are 25 total women who have accused Donald Trump of some form of sexual misconduct. Their stories range from your story to Ms. Leeds' story to E. Jean Carroll's story. You could go on and on and on. And yet Donald Trump has the nerve to stand on a stage in front of a rally audience and say the following. Take a look at what Donald Trump said recently about women.
I am your protector. I want to be your protector. As president, I have to be your protector. I hope you don't make too much of it. You will no longer be abandoned, lonely, or scared. You will no longer be thinking about abortion.
Natasha, what do you think when you hear Donald Trump say he will be women's protector?
Well, I think you know my answer to that. When I heard that clip, I felt sick to my stomach. I immediately sent it to the other women I know who have been groped by him, and they felt the same way. And, he's delusional, or he knows he's lying. I'm not sure which it is, but he's trying desperately to impress women and get their vote. But any woman who has proper perspective and is smart and looking at the situation can see that he is a predator and not a protector.
Well said, and succinctly said, and I think quite accurate. Natasha Stoyanov, George Conway, thank you both.
39 days until November 5th, and as of tonight, we could tell you that over half the country has voting available. I have told you how we are living through different times, even if we still have the old terminology. People say election day. I say it sometimes. It's a holdover, but this is election month or a month and a half. 26 states now allowing some kind of early voting, whether that be by mail, where as soon as you get a ballot, you can mail it back at your choosing, the time of your choosing, or even some in-person early voting underway. And that might be good news for whichever candidate has the momentum right now. Democrats increasingly think it's Kamala Harris. She arrived in Arizona today, where she's doing a border visit to spotlight immigration. She's speaking tonight. She's expected to go after Trump, as she's been doing on different policy issues across the week. Now, since becoming the nominee, Harris has been trying to also do a type of political jujitsu. Everybody knows that Trump has thought immigration is his issue. He's thought that all the way back from 2016 when he talked about a wall that, if you check, never got built. She is trying to turn the issue against him.
Well, first of all, we do have a broken immigration system, and it needs to be fixed.
I went after transnational gangs, drug cartels, and human traffickers who came into our country illegally.
I'm the only person in this race who actually served a border state as Attorney General to enforce our laws.
We can create an earned pathway to citizenship, and secure our border.
He killed a bill that would have actually been a solution because he wants to run on a problem.
Now, what do Americans think? Well, it is a tale with kind of two sides to it. On the one hand, Kamala Harris still trails Trump by a lot on an issue that matters to many Americans, and especially in those border states. You can see he's got a 21-point edge. On the other hand, Democrats were running in those states and around the country with a nominee recently, the current president, who trails Trump by far more. So, by strict political math, the new nominee is doing better than the old one, but still trails Republicans. Now, I can tell you that Harris-Walz campaign co-chair Mitch Landrieu was just with us on the beat, and here's what he told us on this issue. Immigration, this is pretty striking. There are so many people who are critical of Donald Trump on immigration, if you remember what it was like. But my question for you is about the politics here. Right now, Trump's still 20% more trusted on immigration than her.
Yeah.
Why is that? How do you change that?
Well, I would say two things. Every day that the vice president has been in this race, she has beaten him. On every day that she has been in this race, she has moved ahead and closed the gaps, and she will do this on immigration. We actually negotiated a border bill, the toughest border bill that has ever been negotiated. The only reason why that bill failed is because Donald Trump wanted to use that as a political wedge. He put himself, again, ahead of the safety and security of the people. And the more you tell that story, the more people are going to go, look, we can have safe and tough borders, and we can also be a nation that's got a good legal immigration plan. We have to get that done.
So that's what we're hearing from the very top of the Harris campaign. Meanwhile, on foreign policy issues, former President Trump met with current Ukrainian President Zelensky. This was in New York right after Harris held her meeting at the White House. And I mentioned this in our coverage this week, and the contrast I want to show you tonight here is striking. Now, you live in America or you're watching the news, you are familiar with all these debates about platforming and how much should you show different people. And Donald Trump and some of his now convicted aides have been caught lying, some of them caught in defamation schemes. So there's always the question of how much do you want to show that and how thoughtfully should you do it. I have told you that we try to really be journalistic. So we will fact check, we will show you things and tell you why we're showing them. When we have people on and sources on, we fact check them in real time. We deal with all that. What I'm about to show you, there's a reason for it. And it's not just a fact check thing. It's a who do you want with the nuclear codes thing. The war in Ukraine is one of the most significant international issues around. And while Donald Trump says he's been president and he's walked the walk and talked the talk, take a look at how he actually sounds, what he's actually saying when he's dealing not only with these issues in general on the campaign trail, but with the leader of war-torn Ukraine and all the deaths and all the difficulty that that country's going through, and contrast that to what Vice President Harris is doing when she's been in similar scenarios. The contrast is worth seeing.
I've been proud to stand with Ukraine.
He said President Trump did absolutely nothing wrong.
My support for the people of Ukraine is unwavering.
He said it loud and clear, and the impeachment hoax died right there.
And I will work to ensure Ukraine prevails in this war.
It really essentially ended the impeachment hoax.
We can't compare two visions for how to deal with that war because Donald Trump didn't even pretend to talk much about the war or the gravity of the situation, even standing next to the leader of Ukraine. He ran it back 6 years to his own politics with some misinformation and claims about his own political and domestic impeachment, which involved, as you may recall, very credible evidence, including from his own aides and witnesses, that he was trying to shake down Ukraine to get a hoax investigation of the Bidens going. Donald Trump also said that both Russia and Ukraine should get some sort of fair deal out of the war, and you have all of his attacks on NATO to boot. So that's one contrast. In the campaign, I can also tell you there's a focus on the running mate for Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and both Vance and Walz have a big spotlight on them. Their debate is next week. Remember, that is the last scheduled debate involved in the general election whatsoever because Trump has refused any other debate. So that's coming Tuesday. A lot of attention on both of them. But more scrutiny on Vance today because the Washington Post has unearthed what were private messages that he sent in 2020. So this is him and his views writing in 2020 when he said Trump has so thoroughly failed to deliver on economic populism. I think he will probably lose to Biden in 2020, which he did. If you go back one more cycle before Vance thought Trump would get power, he was even bolder, famously calling his now top-of-the-ticket running mate reprehensible and, quote, cultural heroin. Now, Vance has tried to distance himself from all of his public statements as an adult, as a person interested in politics. He says that was all before Trump became president. So the 2020 talk here, while not as strong as the heroin lingo, shows that well into the end of the first term of Donald Trump, he still viewed him on policy, on substance, on economics as a failure. You can compare Vance's well-known and established attacks on Trump to the way Harris and Biden get along as VP.
Just today, President Biden announced record job growth.
From the beginning, the president has been very direct and clear about our perspective.
And I can think of no one more committed to achieving our collective goals than President Joe Biden.
President Biden set an ambitious goal. Today's numbers reflect the point that President Biden has made many times. America's economy is strong.
And what's the message to Iran?
Don't.
As President Biden said, just don't.
Exactly. One word. Pretty straightforward.
One ticket has had unity, which now has even involved the succession of Vice President Harris coming to the fore. The unity, partly a product of what Democrats call Biden's selfless or heroic act. The other ticket can't keep it straight whether they even agree that Donald Trump is a good president or should be president. Just depends how far back you go on what J.D. Vance has said. Now, what's going on out there in the polling? How do we make sense of it? I've told you we are very careful and precise in what we show you, because if you remember past election cycles where the polling didn't come true, a lot of the polling wasn't worth looking at to begin with. These national polls that you see people talk about online or on social media, they don't even, well, before I show you this, let me finish this point. Before I show you the favorability, which is worthwhile, I'm going to mention that the national polling that you hear about on social media, it doesn't even correspond to an election that's going to happen, right? So you could see Hillary Clinton's up by a couple points, but we use the Electoral College. So swing state polling matters more. Now, if you want a temperature, the favorability number I just mentioned, we're going to put that back up for you. The temperature is good news. There is momentum for Harris as her favorability has surged. You see that something that's happened recently, whether you look at it as an effective campaign, unity of the Democratic Party, voters who hadn't thought about her much now taking a tune in as she's gotten a lot more attention and been on the debate stage. Whatever you attribute it to, these are solid increases. Elon Musk himself said they are real, and he was complaining about them, and that kind of shows you how even Trump's opponents see the problem of her surging favorability. That's since July. Harris, though, is not taking anything for granted, and when you go to the states that will decide this thing, we have evidence that shows why her campaign is targeting the blue wall. She has spent now $136 million on ads there, TV and radio, focusing on the blue wall or the Rust Belt, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. That is more than in some of those other states that were, by some of them, part of the Biden winning coalition that you see on the right side. Harris also directing all of her time on the ground, which matters because you reach voters in person and you drive local media coverage, to that Rust Belt. So Harris and Walz rallies, you've probably caught some of them on the news. They're usually in those Rust Belt states. I can show you 13 stops in PA. That's the most. Wisconsin at 7. And Michigan a priority at 5. And when I told you Julia Louis-Dreyfus from Veep is coming up, she will actually be in Wisconsin with some other stars backing Harris and Democrats this very weekend. So a lot of attention on that blue wall, the blue wall that failed for Hillary, that held for Joe, and that Kamala Harris sees as her key to turning the momentum I showed you into the right state winning coalition. Because if you have the majority of votes in this country, that doesn't mean you become president. One of the many weird things about this democracy, United States.